He was already at the curb before my car stopped moving. My son standing outside the Tim Hortons on Dunbar Street with a duffel bag at his feet, and my granddaughter asleep against his shoulder, looked like a man who hadn't slept in 2 days. Because he hadn't. I rolled down the window. "Get in." He didn't ask how I knew. He just opened the door. That was 3 weeks ago. And everything that happened after the phone calls, the documents, the meeting I arranged on a Tuesday morning that made a very powerful man realize he had made a very serious mistake, started with that drive. But let me go back to the beginning. Because you need to understand what kind of family we were before you can understand what I did. My name is Margaret. I am 63 years old. I was born in New Westminster, British Columbia, raised by a mother who cleaned hotel rooms and a father who drove long haul from Vancouver to Calgary until his back gave out. We were not wealthy people, but we were not people who stayed down either. I built my company Clearwater Property Management from a single rental unit I bought at 31, with $12,000 I had saved over 7 years. By the time my son Daniel was in high school, I had 42 units across the Lower Mainland. By the time he graduated from SFU, I had expanded into strata management contracts in Burnaby and Surrey. I never talked about money at the dinner table. I believed, and I still believe, that the point of building something is not to announce it. The point is to have it ready when someone you love needs it. Daniel met his wife Serena at a conference in Toronto. She was sharp, driven, the kind of woman who remembered every detail of every conversation. I liked her immediately. Her family was from Oakville, old Ontario money, the kind that expresses itself quietly through property and school affiliations, and a certain way of looking at people they consider beneath them. Her father, my son's father-in-law, I will call him Gerald, ran a mid-sized commercial real estate development firm that his own father had started in the 70s. He had inherited it, expanded it modestly, and spent most of his adult life convinced that he had built it from nothing. He was the kind of man who interrupted people. Not rudely, not loudly, just consistently, as though whatever the other person was saying was simply a placeholder until he could speak again. When Daniel and Serena got married, I attended the wedding in a blush-colored dress, and I smiled and I said the right things. Gerald shook my hand once, briefly, and spent the rest of the reception talking to a commercial lender from Mississauga. I drove back to Vancouver the next morning. I did not think about Gerald again for almost 4 years. Then my son called me on a Thursday evening in February. He did not say hello. He said, "They let me go." I sat down. "What do you mean?" "Gerald, the board. They restructured my position, said the role was redundant." His voice was flat in the way voices get when a person is holding something much larger than flatness. "It was my job, Mom. I built that residential division from 8 units to 63 in 4 years. Where are you now?" "Parking lot." "I can't go back inside yet." "Where is Lily?" "Daycare pickup is at 5. Serena's getting her." I asked him several questions over the next 20 minutes. When had this started? What was said, exactly? Whether anything had been put in writing? Whether he had spoken to a lawyer? He answered carefully and I listened without interrupting, which is something I have practiced my whole life, because my mother told me once that the most dangerous thing you can do when something bad happens is talk too fast. After the call, I made tea. I sat at my kitchen table in Kitsilano and I looked out at the water and I thought, Daniel had been working for Gerald's company for 3 years. He had moved his family from Vancouver to Oakville for this. He had put Lily in a daycare near their house, in the neighborhood they had chosen together, close to Serena's parents. He had built the residential division from nothing. I had watched the numbers because Daniel sent me quarterly updates, not because I asked, but because he was proud and wanted me to see it. And now he had been removed, quietly, efficiently, in the language of restructuring. I have been in business long enough to know what that language means. It means someone wanted you gone and found a clean way to do it. I did not call Daniel back that night. I called my lawyer. His name is Frank Osei. He has worked with me for 11 years and he does not ask unnecessary questions. I told him what had happened and asked him to look into the severance terms and whether the restructuring was legally defensible. He said he would have something for me by Monday. Over the next 2 weeks, things moved in the way that things move when a family is quietly breaking apart. Serena became distant, not cold exactly, but careful. Daniel told me she was under pressure from her parents, that Gerald had made comments about the direction things were going, that he had said, and this is the part I keep returning to, that Daniel had never really understood the culture of the company, that he had always been an outsider. I asked Daniel what that meant. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I think you know what it means, Mom." I did. My son is a mixed-race man in a firm run by a family that has been shaking the same hands in the same golf clubs for 40 years. He had been useful to them when the residential market was growing and his numbers were good. When the market softened and Gerald needed to consolidate power back within the family, my son was the first thing he moved. I did not say this to Daniel. I said, "Okay, I hear you." What I did not tell him was what I had already started doing. Frank had come back to me on Monday as promised. The severance offer was legal but minimal. 8 weeks, no continuation of benefits, a standard non-disclosure agreement that was drafted broadly enough to prevent Daniel from discussing anything related to the residential division's performance. Frank thought the NDA was aggressive. I thought the NDA was a tell. You do not silence people this thoroughly unless you have something worth hiding. I asked Frank to look at the residential division's financials from the outside. Not anything private, just what was public. Filings, corporate registry, any permits pulled in Daniel's division over the past 2 years. Then I made a different call. Her name is Patricia Chow. She works in commercial real estate in Toronto, and she has known me since we were both young women, trying to get financing from banks that did not take us seriously. She knows everyone. She does not gossip, she simply has very good information, which is different. I asked her a few questions about Gerald's firm, about a specific condo development in Mississauga that Daniel had been the lead on before he was let go. Patricia called me back in 48 hours. She said, "Margaret, why are you asking about this?" I told her. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You need to look at the permit applications for Phase 2, the ones filed after Daniel left." I looked. The development that Daniel had designed, managed, and shepherded through 18 months of planning approval had been refinanced 2 weeks after his termination. The new financing structure moved the project into a numbered company. That numbered company was controlled by a holding entity registered in New Brunswick. The sole director of that holding entity was Gerald's son-in-law, not Daniel, his other son-in-law, the one who had been at every board meeting but never seemed to have a defined role. I sat with this for a long time. Daniel had built something profitable, and Gerald had removed him before the profits came in, restructured the ownership so the returns would flow to someone else, and used an NDA to make sure Daniel couldn't talk about what he knew. It was clean. It was legal, possibly. But it was theft. Not the kind you can report to police easily. The kind that happens in boardrooms, in restructured equity agreements, in the quiet language of shareholder meetings. I called Frank again. I told him what I had found. He asked me a question I will not repeat here because it is still subject to some discretion, but the short version is, did Daniel have any documentation of his work on the Mississauga project? Any emails, any internal correspondence, anything he had retained before he left? Daniel, as it turned out, had kept everything. Not because he had suspected anything, but because he was organized, because he was thorough, and because when you grow up watching your mother run a property management company, you learn early that paper trails are the difference between a conversation and a legal argument. This is the part I have thought about many times since. I had raised my son to document things, and that documentation was now the most important thing in our lives. It took 6 weeks to do properly. Frank worked with a litigation lawyer named Adaze out of a firm on Bay Street. They reviewed everything Daniel had kept. They built a picture, not just of the restructuring, but of a pattern. Over the past 5 years, 2 other senior employees had left Gerald's company with minimal severance after working on projects that subsequently became very profitable for a connected entity. Both had signed NDAs. Neither had retained adequate documentation. Daniel had. In week 5, Frank sent a letter to Gerald's firm. It was not a demand letter in the traditional sense. It was, in Frank's words, an invitation to have a conversation before certain materials were shared with the Ontario Securities Commission and the Canada Revenue Agency, both of whom take an interest in the beneficial ownership of numbered companies and the restructuring of profitable projects immediately before their completion. Gerald responded through his own lawyer within 4 days. I am not going to describe every detail of what followed because some of it is still subject to an agreement, and I am a woman who keeps her word even when the other party does not deserve that courtesy. But I will tell you the broad strokes. Gerald's firm paid Daniel a settlement that properly reflected his contribution to the Mississauga project. It was not a small number. It was the kind of number that means Daniel does not have to make certain decisions based on money for a long time. The NDA was voided as part of the agreement. Gerald's legal team tried very hard to keep it in place. They did not succeed. The development went ahead. Gerald's other son-in-law was listed as a co-developer. His name appears in the filings. These are public documents. And Serena? This is the part that does not have a clean resolution, and I have had to make peace with that. When the settlement was finalized, Daniel told Serena everything. Not the version Gerald had told her, the real version, with the documents, the timeline, the numbered company. She sat with it for 3 days. Then she called me. She said, "I didn't know." I believed her. I still believe her. I think she had been raised in a family where Gerald's version of events was simply the version of events, where questioning it was not something one did. I think she loved my son, and had also been taught, in ways she probably couldn't name, that family loyalty meant not asking certain questions. I told her I believed her. I told her that what mattered now was what she chose to do with what she knew. They are still together. It is not easy. These things are never easy when the trust has been damaged this way, but they are working through it, and Lily starts junior kindergarten in September. And last week, Daniel sent me a photo of the 3 of them at Britannia Beach, and they were laughing. I look at that photo sometimes. I did not build Clearwater Property Management to be impressive. I built it because I was a woman who understood that security is not given to you, it is constructed, quietly, carefully, over years. I built it so that when someone I loved needed help, I would have something real to offer them. Not sympathy, not advice, something real. Gerald made one fundamental mistake. Not the restructuring, not the NDA, not the numbered company in New Brunswick. Those were all things that could have gone another way with better lawyers or worse documentation. His fundamental mistake was deciding that my son was someone who could be quietly removed and forgotten, that my son had no one behind him worth worrying about. He saw a young man who had married into his family and come to work at his firm. He did not see me. I drove back to Vancouver in March, a few days after the settlement was signed. I stopped at the Tim Hortons on Dunbar Street, the same one where I had picked up Daniel that February morning. I ordered a medium dark roast, and I sat by the window for a while, and I watched the rain come in off the water. I have lived in this city my whole life. I know what the rain here looks like. I know the particular gray of the sky in February. The way the mountains disappear behind cloud and you forget they're there, until one morning you wake up and the light has changed and suddenly they're back, closer than you remembered. That is what this felt like in the end. I had been there the whole time. He just hadn't looked. To every woman listening to this who has spent years building something, a business, a network, a foundation of quiet capability that the people around you have never fully seen, I want you to hear this. Do not shrink it. Do not apologize for it. Do not let anyone make you feel that because you built it without announcing it, it doesn't count. The day will come when someone you love needs exactly what you have, and you will be ready. I was ready, and I knew exactly what to do.